She wasn't his. That was the only lie Cort Fane had never bothered to write down in that meticulous ledger he kept in his skull, the one where every debt, every slight, every favor owed was catalogued with the cold precision of a man who believed the entire world could be reduced to columns. Sian knew this because she was the one who kept his actual ledgers. She knew what he valued and what he didn't, and for 4 years she had never once appeared on either list. She was the mechanism by which his empire balanced. She was the woman who made the numbers behave. That was all. She told herself this every morning when she walked into the Fane Group's 32nd floor offices on South Wacker Drive, set her coffee on her own desk, never his, and got to work. It was a Thursday in late October. The lake wind was picking up outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, pushing low grey clouds across a sky that couldn't decide between rain and something worse. Sian was midway through reconciling the discrepancies in the Calumet Harbor invoice bundles, a task that required the kind of concentration most people couldn't sustain for longer than 20 minutes, when Fane walked out of his office. He didn't knock when he came to see her either. That was a thing they shared without either of them having agreed to it. After 4 years, ceremony felt like an insult to efficiency. "The Kovac brothers are pushing back on the fuel premium," he said. He stood at the edge of her workspace the way he always did, too close to be casual, too still to be comfortable. He was a large man, built like someone who had never fully left behind whatever he'd been before the suits and the penthouse offices. There were 2 fingers on his left hand, where the knuckles had been broken and reset wrong, and a scar along his jaw that disappeared into the line of his beard. He didn't explain these things. He didn't explain much of anything. "I need the comparative freight cost analysis before I meet with them Monday. It's already in the shared drive. Red subfolder labeled Monday KBG. Sian didn't look up. "You want me to walk you through the key figures?" A pause. "Yes, later." She finally glanced up. His jaw was working the way it did when something was bothering him that he wasn't going to say out loud. "At what time later?" she asked. 6. "I'm leaving at 5 today." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Sian felt it settle over the desk between them like a physical object. She returned her gaze to her monitor. "You don't leave at 5, Fane said. "My contract says 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday. I stay late because the work requires it." She aligned the stack of printouts beside her keyboard, tapping the edges even. "Today I have somewhere to be. The KBG breakdown is thorough. You won't need me to translate it." She felt rather than saw the stillness move through him. Not anger. Fane didn't do anger the way other men did, all heat and noise. His went cold and inward, like a door shutting somewhere deep in a house. "Where?" he said, not phrased as a question. "Personal." Sian kept her voice neutral, informative, not apologetic. She had learned early that apologizing to Fane was the same as admitting a weakness he would catalogue and use later. She heard the slight shift of his weight. She heard him draw breath to say something else, then decide against it. A moment later, she heard his footsteps move back toward his office. The door closed without slamming. That almost made it worse. At exactly 5 o'clock, Sian shut down her workstation, picked up her bag and walked to the elevator without looking back. She changed in the bathroom of a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. The grey blazer traded for a rust-colored top she'd had for 6 years, and loved precisely because it had nothing to do with the Fane Group. Her hair, which she kept pinned flat during work hours, she shook out over her shoulders on the walk to the Blue Line. By the time she pushed through the door of the Green Mill on North Broadway, she had been someone else for exactly 22 minutes. Ben Culver was already at the bar, turning a glass of sparkling water between his palms. He was a night school instructor she'd met 3 months ago during the one accounting course she'd audited purely out of restlessness, an attempt to remember what it felt like to learn something without the information being immediately dangerous. He was earnest in a way she had initially found irritating and had gradually come to find restful. He taught community college. He drove a 10-year-old Civic. He thought the most stressful thing about her job was spreadsheet formatting. She liked him. She liked, more specifically, that he knew nothing. They ordered food. He made her laugh twice, once with a story about a student who had submitted a budget analysis for a fictional crime empire as a class project, clearly having watched too many streaming shows. She laughed without calculating whether she should, and that in itself felt like something. She didn't notice the figure on the far side of the street through the bar's rain-streaked window. She didn't see the dark town car idling at the curb. She felt something, a prickling at the back of her neck around 9 o'clock, the old instinct that had kept her intact in neighborhoods that were not forgiving. But when she looked toward the window, there was only rain and the neon smear of the street. Ben reached across the bar top and covered her hand with his, a simple gesture, uncomplicated and warm. Sian let herself have it. She did not know that 200 feet away, standing in the shadow of an awning, with rain working its way down the back of his collar, Cort Fane had stopped breathing. The file on Ben Culver was on Fane's desk by 7 the next morning. Benjamin R. Culver, 31, BA in economics from DePaul, teaching 2 sections of intro finance at Daly College. Annual income that would not have covered Sian's monthly parking. Clean record. No debt outside a small student loan, no vices anyone could find. An apartment in Logan Square. He coached a youth soccer team on Saturday mornings. Fane read the file twice. Then he sat in the dark of his office for a very long time. He was not, he told himself, irrational. He was a man who had built an operation spanning 3 port cities on the strength of a single principle. Every variable can be accounted for, every threat can be neutralized, and sentiment is a form of debt you pay with blood. He had learned this at 22 in a warehouse in Gary, Indiana that no longer existed. He had not forgotten it since. Sian was not a variable. She was a fixed point. She was the only person in his operation who had never attempted to steal from him, never leveraged him, never flinched at what she saw in those ledgers. She had been placed in his orbit by a dying accountant who had called in a favor and said only this girl sees things in numbers that you won't believe, and she had made herself indispensable within 30 days. He had not touched her. He had maintained a professional structure that served them both, and if he stood at his window sometimes and watched her work through the glass partition, the precise, unhurried way she moved through a problem, the slight fuss between her brows when something didn't add up, that was a private matter. It belonged to no one. The man at the bar had touched her hand. Fane picked up his phone. He didn't call anyone violent. He was not a street-level man. He was a chess player, and chess players didn't flip the board. They moved pieces. He made 2 calls. The first was to a city planning contact who owed him 3 years of favors. Daly College had applied for an expansion grant 6 months ago. New lab equipment, classroom renovation, routine approval. Already through 2 rounds of review, Fane asked for it to be quietly stalled in committee. Indefinitely. The second call was to the property management company that handled Ben's building in Logan Square. A company whose primary lender was a bank that Fane's shell holdings propped up significantly. He mentioned, in the careful language of a man who never says what he means directly, that the building's ownership situation might be worth revisiting. He hung up. He went back to the Kovac freight analysis. He highlighted the figures in yellow. He told himself it was proportionate. The error was a rounding discrepancy of $43. Sian almost missed it. She was processing the weekly Trasov log from the Harbor Management LLC. One of the smaller shells in Fane's portfolio, the kind that moved money in amounts designed to look like routine maintenance payments, when the figure caught her eye. $43 over what the automated transfer should have produced, given the current rate structure. $43 was nothing. $43 was noise. Except Sian did not believe in noise. In her experience, noise was just a pattern you hadn't identified yet. She pulled the source account. She pulled the subledger. She found the line item, a routing adjustment, made 6 days ago, manually overridden by an authorization code that should have been retired 8 months ago. She followed the code. It led her to a holding account she recognized. The account was tied to a property company she had personally restructured 2 years ago, as a favor Fane had called in on behalf of a contact she'd never met. She stared at the screen. Her coffee went cold. She ran the query backward. She found the other transaction, the planning office. It took her 40 minutes, because whoever had done it had been careful. But Sian had spent 4 years learning how Fane was careful, and there was a grammar to it, a syntax. She could read it like her own handwriting. Daily College expansion grant, stalled as of 11 days ago. Ben's building, ownership transfer filed 9 days ago. The date on the first transaction, the morning after the green mill. Sian sat back in her chair. The office hummed around her. Someone in accounting was heating soup in the microwave. Outside the window, the lake was flat and grey under an overcast sky. She was not afraid. She had grown up in a house where the lights were sometimes off because the bill hadn't been paid, where certain kinds of anger came without warning, and you learned to read a room before you set your bag down. She was not a person who frightened easily. What she felt, sitting in that chair with the transaction log open on her screen, was the specific chill of realizing the cage had always been there. She had simply never looked at the walls. She printed nothing. She closed the windows. She turned off her monitor. She picked up her bag, walked across the bullpen, and opened Fane's door without knocking. He was on the phone. He looked up. He held up one finger. Sian sat down in the chair across from his desk and waited. She folded her hands in her lap. She kept her face even, which was something she was very good at. He finished the call. He set the phone down. He looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and she watched the precise moment he understood from her stillness that something had shifted between them. The Daily College grant, Sian said, and the Logan Square building. Fane said nothing. I found it in the transfer log. $43 rounding error in the Harbor LLC account. You should tell whoever routes through that authorization code that it flags. She kept her voice flat, informative, like she was delivering a report. It took me less than an hour. He was quiet for long enough that she started counting seconds. It's handled, he said finally. Ben Culver didn't do anything to you. Fane's voice was very controlled. He didn't. He's a community college teacher. He coaches kids on weekends. You disrupted a grant that would have given disadvantaged students access to better equipment because he sat next to me at a bar. She looked at him directly, the way she only allowed herself when the professional distance had already been destroyed by the other party. That's not strategy. That's a tantrum with a budget. He stood up. He moved around the desk. He stopped when he was close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw. She didn't move back. You don't understand what you are to this operation, he said. I understand exactly what I am to this operation. I built the system that runs it. She looked up at him. That's different from what you think I am to you, and you don't get to blur that line without my permission. Something shifted in his face. Not rage. She had expected rage. It was worse than rage. It was something exposed, something raw and unwilling, like a wound he hadn't expected to take. Sian. I'm not done. She stood, so she wasn't craning her neck anymore. You don't own a single thing about me. Not my time outside this office, not the people I choose to spend it with, not the way I look when I don't have to be here. Her voice was quiet because Sian had learned long ago that the quieter you spoke, the more carefully people listened. You are my employer. I have done exceptional work for you for 4 years, and you repaid me by treating me like an asset on a balance sheet that you couldn't stand to see depreciate. Aren't you, Fane said, not cruelly, like a man reading from the only text he knew. No. She picked up her bag from the floor. I'm the woman who found the hole in your money laundering structure that would have put you in federal prison and patched it on a Sunday afternoon without telling you because I didn't want you to panic and make it worse. I am not a line item. She moved toward the door. I'm resigning. Effective now. The operational documentation is current. You'll find the handover files on the blue drive, encrypted. Decryption key is in the letter on my desk. She stopped at the door frame without turning around. Fix what you did to Ben Culver, she said. She walked out. She pressed the elevator button with a steady finger and watched the numbers count down from 32. She was in the elevator before she let herself breathe. The new job was a senior controller position at a regional logistics firm in the West Loop. Clean office, clean money, a team of junior accountants who sent her good morning emails. The salary was real. The benefits were comprehensive. The work was by any measurable standard fine. Sian sat in her new corner office on day 8 and thought about the Harbour LLC. She thought about the invisible architecture she had built inside Fane's operation, the shell within a shell routing system, the way she had tiered the cash flows so that pulling one thread wouldn't unravel the rest, the 3 separate legal identities she had constructed for a container shipping subsidiary in Milwaukee. It was the most sophisticated financial structure she had ever built. It was also completely invisible to everyone, except her. She thought about the $43 rounding error. She thought about the way Fane had looked at her in that moment, not with the cold authority he maintained like a second skin, but with something underneath it. Something considerably more honest than she had been prepared for. On day 14, she opened her laptop at home and ran a quiet query through a financial aggregator she still had access to from her old credentials. She hadn't fully closed her back channel access, which she told herself was professional habit, and nothing more embarrassing than that. She found the daily college grant, approved, reinstated in fact, processed in record time 3 days after she had resigned. She found Ben's building, ownership transfer reversed, a letter of rent abatement for 18 months issued through the same property company, what amounted to a quiet financial apology, untraceable to its source. She sat with that for a long time. She hadn't expected that. Cort Fane did not chase her. He did not call. He did not send anyone to her apartment. Whatever she had said had landed somewhere inside him, and he had held it. She found that she hadn't expected that either. It was the 17th night when her phone rang at 11:40. The number was one she recognized. Rast, Fane's logistics head, the only person in the organization who never overstated a situation. Miss Boyle. His voice was rough and slightly off. I apologize for the hour. I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no. She heard wind in the background, traffic. He got hit, Rast said. Port operation went sideways. Grigor's people made a move. It's contained, but he won't let the doctor touch him. He ran the doctor out of the safe house 20 minutes ago. A pause. He's bleeding and he's alone and he's not going to call anyone because that's how he is. Sian looked at the ceiling. He specifically said not to call you, Rast added. I want you to know that. I'm not here on his orders. Where? She said. The safe house was a flat above a closed restaurant on the near south side. Rast waited in the car. Sian climbed the stairs alone, her bag over her shoulder, keys in her hand out of old habit. The door at the top was unlocked. The lights inside were low, a single lamp in the corner casting more shadow than it cleared. Fane was sitting against the wall beside the window, shirt off. The wound at his left side, below the ribs, a graze but a mean one, still seeping through the cloth he'd pressed against it. His phone in one hand, he was staring at it without appearing to be doing anything with it. He looked up when she came in. He looked the way she'd never seen him look. He looked like what happened after the ledger ran out of space. You shouldn't be here, he said. Probably. Sian dropped her bag on the table, pulled out the first aid kit she'd picked up at a pharmacy on the way, and snapped on a pair of gloves. She crossed the room and crouched in front of him. Sian. Hold still. He held still. She worked with the concentrated efficiency she brought to everything, and she did not let herself think about the fact that her hands were steadier than she had any right to expect. She cleaned the wound. She applied pressure. He made no sound, but his jaw was tight enough that she could see the tendons in his neck standing out like cable. The grant, she said while she worked. Ben's building. Silence. Why? She said. Because I was wrong. The words came out stripped of everything but the plain fact of them. And because you were right. And because... He stopped. She looked up. His eyes were on her face with an attention so complete it was almost painful to receive. There was no ledger in it. There was no calculation. There was just the thing underneath all of it, which she suspected had been there for a long time, which he had been conducting a losing war against since approximately the first afternoon she had corrected his arithmetic in front of his capos and not apologized for it. I have never wanted anything I couldn't account for, Fane said quietly. I don't know what to do with the things that don't balance. Sian sat back on her heels. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into the outer pocket of her bag and took out a folded piece of paper. She had written it on the train coming over. It had taken her 6 minutes. She held it out. He took it. He read it slowly, and she watched something move through his face. Not the controlled stillness, but what was underneath the controlled stillness, finally surfacing like an object the water had finished holding down. It was a contract, 1 page. No legal language, because legal language was for people who didn't trust each other's precision. Just terms, clear ones. The work relationship resumes under revised compensation. All decisions affecting Sian's life outside business hours require her explicit consent. Any action taken against a third party in connection with her personal affairs to be disclosed to her immediately. No exceptions. And at the bottom in her even handwriting, he undoes what he did to Ben Culver. He has, this acknowledges it. 2 signature lines, one with her name already signed. Fane read it twice. You already signed it, he said. I made the decision before I came. I don't make decisions I haven't already committed to. He looked at the second line. He looked at her. Something in him that had been held very tightly for a very long time finally released, not with any drama, but with the quiet completeness of a knot worked loose. Do you have a pen? He said. Sian reached into her bag and put a pen in his hand. He signed it. She took the paper back, folded it, and put it away. She finished securing the bandage. She stood up, pulled off the gloves, and looked down at him. Monday morning, she said. The Kovac files still need to be walked through before the meeting. Monday, Fane agreed. He sounded, for the first time in 4 years, like a man who actually intended to sleep. Sian picked up her bag. She moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and let herself look back once. At the man who had quietly dismantled someone else's life, trying to contain something he didn't have a word for, sitting against a wall in a cold room with her terms in his pocket, and something his eyes that looked, for the first time, like someone who understood what he actually owed. For the record, she said, the column you couldn't account for. He looked at her. It balances, Sian said. You just had to learn my system. She walked down the stairs and out into the Chicago cold. Rast was waiting at the curb. She got into the car and looked out the window at the city she had never once considered leaving, and she did not feel like a woman who had locked herself in a cage. She felt like the one who had always held the key.